Franz Stigler was born on August 26, 1915, in Regensburg, Bavaria, a quiet place where church bells mattered more than sirens, and the sky was something to admire, not fear. As a child, Franz loved two things deeply: the sound of aircraft engines and the silence of prayer. His father was a former pilot from World War I, a man who understood the beauty of flight and the cost of war. He would often take young Franz to small airfields, lifting him onto his shoulders as planes passed overhead. One day, Franz asked him, "Papa, what is a pilot?" His father answered with words that would later save lives. "A pilot is not a hunter. A pilot is a protector of the sky." Those words stayed. A childhood without hate. Franz grew up in a Germany still wounded by WWII. Poverty was common. Pride was broken. But hatred was not taught in his home. His mother taught compassion. His father taught discipline, and both taught him honor. When other boys played war games, Franz preferred watching clouds, imagining where they came from, where they were going. He wanted to fly not to kill, but to understand the sky as a calling. By his teenage years, Franz joined gliding clubs. No engine, no weapons. Just wind and skill. Up there, he felt free. No borders, no enemies, only balance. Instructors noticed something different about him. He flies gently, like he listens to the air. Germany changes. Franz does not. As the 1930s progressed, Germany changed fast. Uniforms appeared. Marches grew louder. Orders replaced conversations. But Franz stayed the same quiet, disciplined young man. He joined the Luftwaffe not out of hate, but duty, and because flying was the only life he knew. Training for war, learning restraint. Flight training was brutal. Mistakes meant death. Fear was hidden. Emotion discouraged. But Franz excelled, not because he was aggressive, but because he was calm. His instructor once warned him, "In war, hesitation kills." Franz nodded, but deep inside, he believed something else. In war, blind obedience kills the soul, the knight's code. Franz idolized old fighter aces, men who followed a code. No shooting, parachuting pilots. No attacking helpless aircraft. Respect the enemy who cannot fight back. To Franz, these rules weren't outdated. They were sacred. First combat. First scar. When Franz finally faced combat, he saw death for the first time. Burning aircraft. Falling men. Screams swallowed by engines. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from memory. He prayed quietly. Not for victory, for mercy. A promise made in silence. Standing beside his aircraft one evening, Franz touched the cold metal and whispered, "If I must fight, I will fight with honor." He didn't know then that one day that promise would put his own life at risk. The path ahead. Franz Stigler was becoming a skilled fighter pilot, but fate was preparing something else for him. A moment, a choice, a single encounter in the sky. That would define him forever. The sky Franz Stigler once loved was changing. Where it had once meant freedom, it now carried orders, from gliders to war machines. By the late 1930s, Franz officially entered Luftwaffe flight training. The aircraft were no longer silent gliders. They roared. Messerschmitt Bf 109Ns lined the airfields. Sleek, fast, deadly. Instructors spoke in sharp commands. Mistakes were not corrected twice. Franz adapted quickly, not because he enjoyed violence, but because discipline was second nature to him. Skill without cruelty. During dogfight simulations, Franz stood out. He didn't waste bullets. He didn't panic. He didn't chase recklessly. Instead, he waited, observed, calculated. One instructor noted, "Stigler doesn't fight with anger. He fights with control. That control made him dangerous in the air. The weight of responsibility. Franz understood something early. A fighter pilot's decision lasts seconds, but its consequences last forever. Every time he fired, someone would not come home. That thought never left him. Promotion through merit. Franz's performance earned him rapid advancement. He was assigned to Jagdgeschwader 27, JG 27, an elite fighter wing. Africa, Europe, multiple fronts. War was expanding, and so was the pressure. First kill, first burden. Franz's first confirmed kill came during an aerial engagement. The enemy aircraft caught fire, spun, vanished into clouds. His radio crackled with congratulations. But Franz did not celebrate. That night he sat alone, hands shaking, not from fear, from realization, words that haunted him. He remembered his father's voice. A pilot is a protector of the sky. And now, he wondered, who was he protecting? Honor under threat. As the war intensified, the rules Franz respected began to fade. New pilots were aggressive, brutal. They chased burning planes, ignored surrender gestures. Franz confronted one pilot after a mission. "You fired after he was done," Franz said. The pilot shrugged. Orders are orders, a line drawn. Franz understood then. This war would test more than skill. It would test character. He made a quiet decision. He would follow orders, but never abandon honor, even if it cost him everything. The calm before destiny. By 1943, Franz was an experienced ace. Multiple victories, respected by peers. But fate was approaching, not in the form of a dogfight, but in the form of a crippled enemy bomber, flying alone through the sky. Skill made Franz a pilot. Honor was about to make him a legend. The sky over Germany was alive with engines. American bombers had crossed deep into Reich airspace. Factories burned. Cities shook. For the Luftwaffe, it was another day of interception. For Franz Stigler, it would become the most important day of his life. Scramble order. The alarm sounded. Pilots ran. Engines screamed awake. Franz climbed into his Messerschmitt Bf 109. Heart steady, hands calm. The radio crackled. Enemy bombers inbound. Engage and destroy. Clear, simple, deadly. Into the sky. Franz climbed rapidly, piercing through clouds. Then he saw it. A B-17 Flying Fortress, alone. Lagging. Damaged. Bleeding smoke. Easy kill. Any other pilot would have smiled. Closing in. Franz approached from behind. As he drew closer, something felt wrong. The bomber wasn't maneuvering. Its tail guns were silent. Too silent. The shocking sight. Franz moved alongside the bomber. What he saw froze him. The B-17 was ripped apart. Nose shattered. Fuselage torn. Engines burning. Holes everywhere. Crew members were clearly visible. Wounded. Bleeding. Some tending to others. This wasn't a fighting aircraft. It was a flying hospital. A split second of truth. Franz's finger rested on the trigger. One squeeze. One burst. He could destroy it. Earn a kill. Gain honor. Follow orders. But then, one American gunner looked directly at him. Not with hate. With acceptance. The look said, "Do what you must." The father's voice returns. In that moment, Franz heard his father's words echo in his mind. "If I ever hear you shot a helpless man, I will be ashamed to call you my son." His chest tightened. This was not combat. This was execution. Defying war itself. Franz pulled his aircraft closer. He motioned with his hand. He shouted inside his cockpit, "Land! Land now!" Of course, the Americans didn't understand. They stared, confused, terrified. An impossible choice. Franz realized something terrifying. If he shot them, he would live with it forever. If he spared them, he could be executed for treason. This wasn't about bravery. This was about who he was. The decision. Franz lowered his guns. He moved into formation, not to attack, but to protect. Escort of mercy. Flak batteries lay ahead. German anti-aircraft guns would tear the B-17 apart. So Franz did something unthinkable. He flew beside the enemy bomber, close enough to signal, "Don't shoot. This one is under my protection." Every second was deadly. Silent agreement in the sky. Inside the B-17, the American crew watched in disbelief. The German fighter wasn't firing. It wasn't leaving. It was guarding them. A silent understanding formed. Enemy, protector, human, crossing the line. As they reached the edge of German airspace, Franz knew the risk. If anyone saw him escorting an enemy aircraft, court-martial, execution. He pulled up slightly, looked once more at the bomber, saluted, then peeled away. Aftermath in silence. The B-17 limped toward safety. Franz returned to base. No kills reported, no celebration. Just a man who had disobeyed war itself. The fear sets in. That night, Franz couldn't sleep. Not from regret, from fear. What if someone noticed? What if someone talked? He had chosen mercy. Now he would live with the consequences. That day, Franz Stigler did not defeat an enemy. He defeated the war inside himself. Franz Stigler landed his aircraft in silence. No cheers, no claps, no congratulations. Just the sound of the engine cooling, like a heartbeat slowing down. Eyes everywhere. As he climbed out of the cockpit, Franz felt it. Eyes, pilots, ground crew, officers. Anyone could have noticed. Anyone could ask questions. No one did. That was worse. The report. Inside the operations room, Franz filled out his mission report. Enemy bomber damaged. Nothing more. No kill. His hand trembled as he signed. One word too many could end his life. The commander's stare. His commanding officer glanced at the paper, then looked at Franz. Long, silent. Franz held his breath. Finally, the officer said, "You could have taken it." Franz answered calmly, "It was already finished, sir." The officer studied him, then said nothing, living under suspicion. Days passed. No arrest, no punishment. But Franz felt hunted. Every knock sounded like the end. Every call made his heart race. He slept lightly, always listening. The weight of silence. Franz couldn't tell anyone. Not comrades, not friends, not even his diary. Mercy was not something you confessed in wartime Germany. The war goes on. Bombers returned. Fights continued. Franz flew mission after mission. He shot when necessary. He survived when others didn't. But that day in December stayed with him. Always. Another pilot falls. One afternoon, a young pilot crashed on landing. The man died instantly. Franz stood watching the smoke. He realized something painful. Mercy did not make you safe. War punished everyone, kind or cruel. The unspoken code. Older pilots began to respect Franz quietly. Not for what he did, but for how he flew. He didn't chase wrecks, didn't fire at parachutes. Some noticed, some followed. Without words. The cost of honor. Every act of restraint cost Franz. Kills mattered. Numbers mattered. Restraint slowed promotions. He accepted it. He would rather remain human than become efficient. The fear of discovery. Once, an intelligence officer asked, "You ever hesitate, Stigler?" Franz met his eyes. "No, sir." It was the truth. He didn't hesitate. He chose. A quiet prayer. Before each flight, Franz whispered a prayer. Not for survival, for clarity. To recognize when a man was an enemy and when he was simply a man. Time moves forward. Months passed. The war worsened. Losses increased. Germany began to bleed. And Franz carried his secret alone. The thought that haunted him. Sometimes he wondered, did they make it home? Did that bomber survive? Did mercy matter? He would not know. Not yet. Mercy saved lives in the sky, but on the ground it made a man a target. War does not punish mercy. It ignores it. A sky filled with fire. By 1944, the skies over Germany were no longer contested. They were overwhelmed. Hundreds of Allied bombers arrived in waves. Fighters followed like shadows. Airfields burned. Runways cracked. Pilots died before even taking off. Franz Stigler flew almost daily, sometimes twice. No time to think. There was no more time for reflection. No room for philosophy. Engines started. Orders shouted. Planes launched. Either you reacted or you vanished. Friends fall fast. Men Franz trained with disappeared. Some didn't return. Others returned silent, empty. One of Franz's closest comrades was shot down during an interception. His plane spiraled. Franz watched until it hit the ground. No parachute. The guilt of survival. That night, Franz sat alone, helmet beside him, hands dirty with oil and blood. He wondered, why him? Why did mercy not cost him his life? When bravery cost others theirs, there was no answer. A harder Franz. Franz became sharper, faster, more efficient, not cruel, but harder. He learned when mercy was possible, and when it wasn't. The order that changed the air. New directives arrived. Destroy bombers at all cost. No escorts, no exceptions. The old code was gone. The sky had rules now, deadly ones. When mercy is impossible, Franz found himself firing again. Enemy planes maneuvered, fought back, killed. This was real combat, and Franz did his duty. Each kill added weight to his soul. The line he wouldn't cross. Still, he never fired at parachutes, never chased burning wrecks. Some pilots mocked him, others quietly respected him. A moment of recognition. One evening, a senior officer spoke quietly to Franz. "You fly like the old knights." It wasn't praise. It was warning. Germany begins to collapse. Bombing raids flattened cities. Civilian casualties mounted. Pilots knew the war was turning, but orders remained the same. Fly, fight, die if needed. Franz's inner war. The greatest battle Franz fought wasn't in the air. It was inside. How long could a man stay human while surrounded by death? A thought that wouldn't leave. Sometimes, between missions, Franz looked at the sky and wondered if that B-17 crew ever thought of him. If mercy had echoed across the ocean. No victory, only endurance. By late 1944, Franz had become an experienced ace. Not celebrated, not famous, just surviving. And survival itself felt like betrayal. War rewards destruction, but it remembers mercy in silence. By the winter of 1944, the sky no longer belonged to anyone. It was broken. The airfields begin to die. Franz returned from a mission one morning to find his airfield half gone. Hangars burned. Planes lay flipped like toys. Mechanics searched rubble for bodies. This wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a graveyard. Flying on borrowed time. Fuel was scarce. Aircraft were damaged. Pilots were fewer every week. Young boys, barely trained, were being sent up. Franz saw fear in their eyes, the same fear he once had. Orders without hope. Commanders no longer spoke of victory. They spoke of delay. Hold them back. Buy time. Sacrifice if necessary. Franz understood what that meant. They were being spent. The sky turns against them. Allied fighters dominated the air. They hunted relentlessly. Every takeoff felt like a gamble with death. Sometimes Franz watched new pilots die within minutes. No heroics, no chance. Just fire and silence. A near-death moment. During one interception, Franz's aircraft was hit. Engines sputtered. Smoke filled the cockpit. For the first time since the B-17 incident, Franz thought, This is how it ends. But somehow, barely, he landed. Hard, violent, alive. The weight of survival. As medics pulled him from the cockpit, Franz saw wreckage nearby. Another pilot hadn't made it. Survival no longer felt like luck. It felt like punishment. The old code is gone. Pilots talked less now. No jokes, no stories, only exhaustion. The chivalry of the early war was dead. The sky had become a slaughterhouse. Franz makes a choice. Franz stopped counting missions, stopped counting kills. He focused on one thing only: survive without becoming a monster. A quiet defiance. Even now, he refused to strafe helpless aircraft, refused to kill without purpose. Not rebellion, just humanity. Germany is crumbling. Cities burned endlessly. Civilians fled. Everyone knew the end was coming, but no one knew how bad it would be. The sky falls silent. One evening, Franz stood on the runway. No planes took off. No alarms sounded, just cold wind and smoke. The sky, once full of engines, was quiet. A thought before the end. Franz looked up and whispered, "I did what I could," without losing myself. Whether history would care, he didn't know. When war collapses, only character remains. By early 1945, the war no longer roared. It groaned. A war already lost. Everyone knew the truth now. Germany wasn't fighting to win. It was fighting to delay death. Orders still came. Missions still flew. But hope had evacuated long ago. The airfield of ghosts. Franz walked through the base one morning and barely recognized it. No discipline, no pride. Planes sat unused. Not because they were perfect, but because there was no fuel. Some pilots had disappeared. Some were dead. Some had simply walked away. No one stopped them anymore. Children in uniform. New pilots arrived. 16, 17, hands shaking, eyes too wide. They saluted Franz like he was a legend. He felt sick. These boys weren't warriors. They were offerings, a silent warning. Franz didn't lecture them. He didn't preach. He simply said, "Fly smart, and if you can, come back." That was all. That was mercy. The final missions. Franz still flew, but only when ordered. The sky was owned by Allied aircraft now. American Mustangs. British Spitfires. They appeared like hunters. Fast, relentless, unforgiving. Franz avoided combat whenever possible. Not from fear, but from understanding. No glory left to win. Once, he saw an enemy fighter trailing smoke. Easy kill. Perfect position. But Franz pulled away. What would it prove now? Another number? Another ghost? He let the pilot go. Again. The breaking point. One afternoon, an order arrived. Attack retreating ground units. No exceptions. Franz stared at the paper. Those weren't soldiers. They were men running home. He folded the order slowly and ignored it. Disobedience without words. He took off, flew the mission, returned with empty guns. No explanation given. No questions asked. Everyone understood. The bombing of home. Cities burned daily now. Franz flew over ruins that once held schools, cafes, homes. Smoke rose endlessly. Germany looked like a wound that refused to close. For the first time, Franz wondered, who will survive this victory? The war reaches its end. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. No orders, no missions, just silence. The Reich was collapsing. Officers fled. Files burned. Uniforms discarded. The war had ended not with a final battle, but with exhaustion. Surrender without ceremony. Franz destroyed his aircraft himself, struck it with tools, disabled the engine. He didn't cry. He felt empty. When Allied troops arrived, Franz raised his hands calmly. No resistance, no anger, just relief. Captured, not broken. In captivity, Franz expected hatred. He found curiosity. The Americans treated him like a human being. One guard asked him, "Why didn't you shoot more?" Franz answered softly, "Because I wanted to live with myself." The guard said nothing. The war is over. The memory remains. At night, Franz dreamed of engines, of smoke, of fire, of the B-17 flying away safely. That moment followed him everywhere, not as pride, but as proof, a quiet victory. When Franz was released years later, there were no medals, no parades, no speeches, but there was something stronger, a life lived without regret. One final thought. Franz Stigler did not win the war. He did not change history, but in a sky filled with hatred, he chose mercy, and that mattered. When orders end, conscience begins. A war left behind, but not forgotten. The war ended, but it never truly left Franz Stigler. Years passed. Uniforms were replaced by ordinary clothes, airfields by quiet streets. Yet every night, when the world went silent, the engines returned. Starting over in silence, Franz moved on with his life. He worked, he married, he lived quietly. He never spoke about the war unless asked. And even then, he chose his words carefully. People wanted heroes. Franz had learned that war rarely creates them. Across the ocean, another survivor. In America, Charlie Brown tried to forget too. He survived the war, survived injuries, survived memories. But one mission followed him like a shadow. The day a German fighter pilot didn't pull the trigger. For decades, Charlie wondered, who was that man? A question that refused to die. In the late 1980s, Charlie finally decided to search, not for revenge, not for praise, but for truth. He began asking questions, writing letters, posting messages in veteran newsletters. His message was simple: "I'm looking for the German pilot who spared my life." Most thought it was impossible. Some thought it was a myth. But fate had patience. The letter that reached the past. One day, Franz received a letter, an American name, a familiar date, a description that froze his blood, a damaged B-17, a wounded crew, a choice made in the sky. Franz sat down slowly. His hands shook. He whispered to himself, it was him. 2 lives, 1 moment. Franz wrote back, short, honest, careful. Yes, I remember that day. That was all. That was enough. The meeting arranged. They agreed to meet, not as soldiers, not as enemies, as men. When Franz saw Charlie for the first time, there was no tension, no anger, only recognition. 2 strangers bound by one decision. No words at first. They stood quietly. Then Charlie stepped forward and hugged him. No speeches, no cameras, just gratitude. The question finally asked. Charlie looked into Franz's eyes and said, "Why didn't you shoot me?" Franz answered without hesitation, "I saw myself in you, and I couldn't kill myself." Charlie nodded. He understood. From enemies to brothers, they talked for hours about fear, about youth, about how close death had come. They laughed. They cried. The war finally loosened its grip, a shared message to the world. Later, when their story became known, people asked them, who was right? They both answered the same way. Humanity was. The sky reunited them. They attended events together, spoke to young people, told one simple truth. Courage is not killing. Courage is choosing not to. A bond beyond war. They remained friends for the rest of their lives. When one spoke, the other listened. When one laughed, the other smiled. The war had tried to define them. They refused. Some battles end when the guns fall silent. Others end when 2 enemies shake hands. Some words arrive too late, yet right on time. The letter was simple. No decorations, no dramatic language. Just truth written by a trembling hand. For Franz Stigler, that letter did something the war never could. It finished the battle. A life of silence. For decades, Franz carried his secret quietly. Not because he was ashamed, but because the world was not ready. After the war, people wanted clear heroes and clear villains. Franz's story lived in the gray, and gray stories are often ignored. The weight of one decision. Every year, on that same winter date, Franz remembered the sky, the damaged American bomber, the wounded men inside, the order screaming in his head, and the voice louder than orders. This is wrong. That moment shaped his entire life. Charlie's letter, more than words. When Charlie's letter arrived, Franz read it again and again, not because it was long, but because it said something Franz had never heard before. You saved my life. I've been trying to thank you for 46 years. 46 years. The weight of that number crushed him. A soldier finally understood. For the first time, Franz realized something painful and beautiful. That single act of mercy had outlived the war. It had created children, families, entire futures. Lives that should have ended in smoke continued because he hesitated. Writing back was harder than fighting. Franz stared at the paper for hours. What do you write to a man you spared by disobeying orders? He finally wrote, I did what I hoped someone would do for me. No politics, no justification, just humanity. The letter becomes a bridge. That exchange of letters changed both men. Charlie finally stopped asking, why did I survive? Franz finally stopped asking, did I do the right thing? The answer was written between the lines. The past comes alive again. As news spread, historians reached out. Veterans listened. Young people leaned closer, because this wasn't a story about planes. It was about choice, not a hero's medal, a human one. Franz never received a medal for that day, and he didn't want one, because medals are given for following orders. What he did required breaking them. Charlie's final words on paper. In one of his last letters, Charlie wrote, if you had pulled the trigger, my children would not exist. My grandchildren would not exist. Franz folded that letter carefully and kept it until the day he died. A legacy written in ink, not blood. War records count victories by kills. History remembers victories by lives spared. That letter turned a forgotten moment into a permanent lesson. The quietest victory. No explosion marked it. No parade followed. Just two men, two pens, and the courage to remember. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is the one you choose not to use. Some wars end on paper. Some end in the heart. This one ended face to face. The meeting that history never planned. In the late 1980s, at a small aviation reunion, two old men stood in the same room. Their hair was white. Their hands shook. Their backs were bent by time. But above them, in memory, the sky was still blue. Franz Stigler had flown across oceans to be there. Charlie Brown had waited decades. Neither of them slept the night before. A silence heavier than war. When they finally saw each other, no one spoke. Because how do you greet a man who once held your life on a trigger? How do you thank a man for your entire existence? The room disappeared. Only the past remained. Recognition without words. Charlie looked at Franz's face, and suddenly the memory clicked. Not the uniform, not the plane, the eyes. The same eyes that had looked at him from a fighter cockpit and chosen mercy. Charlie whispered, "You're the one." Franz nodded, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to cry. The handshake that healed decades. They shook hands, not as enemies, not as soldiers, but as survivors. That handshake lasted longer than any battle they had fought. It carried fear, regret, gratitude, and forgiveness. Talking about the day, they sat together for hours. Charlie described the terror inside the bomber, the wounded crew, the belief that death was seconds away. Franz described the order, the rule, the punishment waiting if he disobeyed, and then the choice. I couldn't shoot you. Franz finally said the words out loud. I couldn't shoot you. It would have haunted me forever. Charlie answered softly, You saved not just us. You saved generations. That sentence broke something inside Franz and healed it at the same time. Brothers after the war. From that day on, they became inseparable. They traveled together, spoke together, told the story together, not as propaganda, but as a warning. They showed the world that even in total war, humanity can survive. A story stronger than ideology. They never defended the war. They never glorified it. They simply showed what happens when a human being refuses to become a machine. Their story crossed borders, languages, politics, because mercy needs no translation. The last years. In their final years, Franz and Charlie called each other brothers, not because they wore the same uniform, but because they shared the same sky and chose life in it. When Franz passed away, Charlie said, I lost my brother today. When Charlie passed away, Franz's family said, he waited to meet him again. The sky remembers. Today, planes still fly over that same route. Pilots don't know the story, but the sky does. And somewhere between clouds and memory, that mercy still echoes. Why this story matters. Because war teaches us how to destroy, but this story teaches us how to stop. It proves that one decision, made in seconds, can outlive bullets, bombs, and hatred. Final words. The greatest victory of Franz Stigler.